What's up guys, my name is Cameron, welcome to the channel, and today we're back down here on the beautiful Texas coast and we're gonna be talking all about one of my favorite fish to target, which is the flounder. These fish hit hard, they taste amazing, and right now is a great time of year to catch them. We have 1 week left before the flounder closure begins, where the season will be closed from November 1st to December 15th, but we have a cool front coming later this week with a strong north wind, which should make these fish start to move. So let's go ahead and I'm gonna break down exactly the tips and tricks I've been using for years to catch flounder right here on the Texas coast. So before I even get into the gear or the baits I use to catch flounder, I want to talk about how these fish actually behave, because flounder are ambush predators. They lay on the bottom, flat on the bottom, usually buried in mud or sand, and they wait for bait to swim by. So when you're fishing for flounder, keeping your lure or bait in contact with the bottom is probably the most important thing. The second most important thing is fishing around structure. Flounder are very structure oriented, like most fish, but I would say more so for flounder. If you're not getting snagged, you're not flounder fishing. So that structure could be anything, whether it's seawalls, boat docks, jetty rocks, sunken debris, or grass lines up on the bank or in the marsh or whatnot, or even subtle underwater changes like deeper guts or drop-offs or oyster reefs, or any underwater rocks that you may not even be able to see. Those fish hang right next to them and wait for the prey or wait for that bait fish to swim by and swim around, and then they jump out and grab them. And they're using all that structure not only to camouflage themselves, but also to play the tide and whatnot. So the three things I'm looking for when flounder fishing is, of course, structure, bait, and moving water. If you find those three things at one spot, the chances are there's gonna be flounder hanging around. And there's plenty of spots like that all up and down the coast and all throughout the bay systems. But there are certain hot spots or just popular fishing spots that a lot of people frequent during the fall run here on the upper Texas coast. And many of those spots are shallower flats that are backed up along deeper channels where the fish will stop and hang out for a while as they make their journey to the Gulf through those deeper channels. I'll go over some of those later in the video. So now that y'all know a little bit about how flounder act and behave and where they like to hang out, let's talk about the best time of day and tides to go fishing. So tides are probably the most important thing to look at when targeting any sort of fish, but specifically for flounder, as the tide moves in, they will bump closer to shore and up into those shallow waters, closer to that structure and to those grass lines and just closer to the bank. And as the tide goes out, they will retreat away from the bank and move into those deeper guts and drop-offs. Now, outgoing tide is my favorite for flounder fishing because as the tide falls out, all the bait fish moves out of those shallow waters and gets sucked out, and those flounder actually set up in certain pinch points to feed on all that bait that's getting flushed out. So it makes them very predictable and easier to catch. So one of the best things you can do if you're looking for flounder or trying new spots is to try and locate those pinch points or those funnels where that tide is flowing out and just thoroughly work those areas, because I promise you, if you can find the structure, moving water, and bait coming out of those pinch points, you are going to find flounder. Now that we've gone over how the fish act, when to catch them, and where to catch them, I want to talk about the setups that I like to use. So I like to keep it simple personally. Any sort of medium rod with 20-pound braid, 20 or 30-pound braid, and 20 or 30-pound fluorocarbon leader is going to catch these fish. But what I really look for is a rod that has a sensitive, fast action tip, so I can feel every little bite and I can feel every sort of structure on the bottom, whether it's, mud changing to sand and you can feel that lure hanging in that mud, or if it's, bumping over some oyster. I like to be able to feel all that. So I look for a rod that has a nice sensitive tip, but also has plenty of backbone that I can set the hook super hard and really drill it into them. So if you're looking for a new setup for flounder, what I would recommend is anything like a 6.5 to 7 foot rod, medium action. You can get away with medium light if it has a good backbone, or you could do medium heavy. Either one works, but I really recommend throwing braid, because braid is going to allow you to feel every single bite. Braid has no stretch and it's super sensitive, and sometimes the flounder bite is pretty subtle and sometimes they absolutely thump it, but you never know. So anything like that, and then your just typical inshore setup, so like a 3500 size reel or just your typical inshore bait caster here. These are both great options. Now let's go ahead and go over the preferred bait of choice for flounder. In my opinion, guys, honestly, it doesn't really matter. No matter what you're using, finger mullet, mud minnows, gulp, any sort of artificial, if you put it in front of a hungry flounder, they are going to eat it. especially during the fall run. They are aggressive, they're feeding, and they will eat anything that gets in their vicinity. The most important thing, like I said earlier, is getting it right over them and bumping the bottom with it. They're just laying there on the bottom waiting, and if you can get it in front of them, you're at least gonna get a reaction strike, and they're gonna jump up and grab whatever you're tossing at them. But with that being said, I will tell y'all some of my favorites that I've been using that I've had great success with in the past. Let's start with live bait. So probably the most popular live bait would be finger mullet. That's usually what I use if I'm going to be using live bait to target flounder, because they are very abundant and are easy to catch and easy to keep on the hook, and they stay alive pretty well. But another great bait that you'll see people using is mud minnows. Mud minnows are a little harder to catch. The bait shops don't have them as much as finger mullet, but like I said earlier, guys, either of these is a great option. If you put it in front of a hungry flounder, there's no way they're going to turn down a finger mullet or a mud minnow. So when using these live baits, probably the most popular rig is a Carolina rig. Basically what I have tied up here. All you have is an egg sinker followed by a bead, and that sits on top of your swivel. And then from the swivel down, you have anywhere from a foot to 18 inches of your leader line, and then whatever type of hook you want. Usually I'm running either a circle hook or I'm going to be using a typical like J hook. Either of those are great options. And a Carolina rig is great because it holds your bait on the bottom or holds your line on the bottom, but depending on how much slack you have in your line, it still allows that bait to kind of swim up and swim around and really wiggle around down there and attract a bite. So this is probably the most popular and one of the best rigs for using live bait to catch flounder. Another great way that I've found to use these live baits is to actually just keep it really simple and use a 1/4 ounce jig head and just hook your bait either through the lips or through the eyes so they stay alive, and then you can cast out and let it sit, or you can slowly bounce it along the bottom and kind of use that live bait as a lure. If you don't have a lot of patience for waiting around, this is definitely a good option, and it's a great way to cover water. And of course, another great option for live bait when it comes to catching flounder would be the live shrimp. Everything eats a live shrimp. It's not one of my favorites just because it does tend to get picked apart by bait stealers, but it is one of their primary food sources, and you can throw that on the Carolina rig like the other ones, or what I like to do is take my shrimp, rip off the back knuckle, and hook it on a 1/4 ounce jig head, and then bounce it across the bottom or drag it across the bottom as if it's a lure. That has caught me a lot of big flounder in the past. Now, if you're not a live bait person or you don't like the hassle of catching or dealing with live bait, no worries at all, because artificials work just as good, and some people might even say better, for catching flounder. And by far the most popular artificial lure that you are going to see anywhere on the coast is going to be gulp. Now, gulp is a scented lure, if you're not familiar with it. Now, they make a ton of different styles of scented lures, but two of the most popular for flounder fishing are going to be the shrimp and the gulp swimming mullet. They come in various sizes, but the 4-inch mullet and then the 3 or 4-inch shrimp work great. I'm going to show you how to rig these up real quick. So all you need to catch flounder is just a jig head and a gulp. I have caught so many limits of flounder on this right here. And all you have to do is take your jig head, run it through the front of the gulp, just like any other soft plastic. Come out the back, and that's it. Drag this across the bottom, bump it across the bottom. If you put this in front of a flounder, you're gonna hook up to it. This is a deadly combo, and look how simple it is. Just two things, jig head and a gulp. Now, if you want to present the fish with a couple different options, what you can do is tie up a tandem rig, which is just two lures on the same line. And what this allows you to do is present the fish with two different styles or colors of lures and see which one they like best, pretty much. And this is definitely what I would recommend doing if there's not too many snags. If you're getting snagged every single cast, there's no point in tying up a tandem rig, because that's just gonna be double the tackle that you're losing and more time wasted out there on the water. But if you're fishing a big flat or up next to a seawall and maybe there's nothing under the water that's gonna get you snagged, this is definitely the better option, because like I said, the point of the tandem rig is to present them with two different colors or two different styles of lures and let them pick which one they like best. And a lot of times you will notice that they tend to favor one color or one style over the other. And a little tip that I've been doing for many years is I like to put my darker color lure on bottom and then the lighter color lure on top. I feel like whenever you're dragging that mud or that sand, you need a darker lure that will stand out down there, and then have the lighter lure above that, just kind of floating in the water column. And it's funny because a lot of times I do catch them on that top lure. And by far, my two favorite gulp colors are gonna be the new penny, just like this right here with the chartreuse tail, and then a pearl white. Another honorable mention has to be the chartreuse and the pink. Those are what I always use, and I know a lot of people like to use electric chicken, and I'm sure that's a great color as well. But this is exactly what I'll be throwing this week to hopefully hook into some big old flounder. So the last thing I want to show y'all is how to work your lure. Like I previously said, flounder are ambush predators, and they lay on bottom and wait for a bait or bait fish to come over them. So keeping in contact with the bottom is what I would consider to be the most important part of flounder fishing. And one of the best things you can do when targeting flounder is just to slow down. And I'm talking real slow. A lot of times you'll see people really twitching that rod tip, and while you can catch some like that, especially during the warmer months, during the run, these fish are cooler, their body temperatures are cooler, and they may not be as active and chasing after bait. So I like to just be real slow with it. And I'll show you all the two techniques that I use to work my lure. So number one, which is very simple and very straightforward, you're just gonna drag that lure. So cast it out, let it hit the bottom, and then just like this, slowly drag it across the bottom, just gliding it right over their head. You can drag it sideways like this if you want, or you can lift up and drag it up. Doesn't matter, either way works, but just do it real nice and slow, and then stop, let that bait hit the bottom again, and reel back in that slack. Another popular way to do it would be to cast out, let your bait go all the way down, sink down and hit the bottom, and then this is what I like to do, and it's just twitch that rod tip nice and slow, just like that. Small little twitches, barely bringing it up off the bottom. This gives your bait a lot more action than just dragging it, and I feel like since I started doing this, I've had a lot more success catching flounder. And notice I'm not moving my rod a lot at one time. I'm really only pulling that bait, 2 or 3 feet at a time, but just giving a lot of little bounces within those 2 or 3 feet. And the last thing to note is you have to understand how a flounder hits. Sometimes they're absolutely going to thump the heck out of your rod, and you're going to be 100% positive that you have one on there. But other times they're just going to lightly tap it, a very subtle tap, or you might just be working the lure and stop to reel in your slack, and then whenever you go to drag it again, it's very heavy. You never really know, and a lot of times it can feel like you're just hung on grass or dragging somebody else's line in the water. So what I like to do is when you feel that slight pressure or you feel that tap, it's important not to set the hook right away. Give it a second, let that fish position that bait right in its mouth and let it eat for a second, and then set it hard and drill that hook right into its jaw. And one thing that you'll see a lot of people doing, and what I like to do, is after you feel that thump or whenever you feel that pressure on your rod, I like to slowly drag, like maybe, 4 or 5 inches or a foot or so, and see if you can feel that flounder dragging on your line. And what this is going to do is it's going to help make sure that, one, you're not about to set your hook into a rock and that you're not snagged, but it's also going to help you gauge the size of the fish so you can decide on how long to let it eat. If you're dragging it and it feels super, super heavy, like you're dragging a rug or like you're dragging a heavy plastic bag filled with mud through the water, it's probably a big flounder. And what I like to do is stop and let that fish eat for around 10 seconds or so before I set the hook, so it can get that bait all the way down in it. Now if I'm dragging it and it feels super light, I'll usually set the hook right away so it doesn't swallow it and so I don't kill a bunch of undersized fish. But that is pretty much all you need to know on how to work your lures. I promise you that'll work, and if the flounder are there, they're gonna hit it. So keep in contact with the bottom, slow down your retrieve, and wait to set that hook after you feel that thump. So now that you know the basics of flounder fishing, let's go over some spots that you can try to go out and catch them. It's important to remember that flounder are always in the bays, and they can be caught pretty much all year long, except for in the super cold months whenever they are way out in the Gulf spawning. But the point of this video is to focus on fishing the fall flounder run. And there's a lot of factors that can go into when the run will happen or when it will begin, but probably the most important is water temperature. When the water temperature drops down to around that 70-degree mark, that's usually a good sign that the flounder run is in full swing. But the flounder run does happen in stages, and this is something that a lot of people overlook. So during the summer and during those warmer months, the flounder live way back in the back lakes of the marsh and all throughout the marsh systems. And as we get closer to the month of October, or really into the month of October and closer to November, and as we get some cool fronts and as the days get shorter, and especially as those north winds start to blow and they kind of flush some of that water out of the bays, the flounder begin to move from those back lakes out towards the main part of the bays. First, they move from those back lakes to deeper parts within the marsh, and then they move from those deeper spots into the channels within the marsh. Then they move from those channels to the main marsh drains, and then from there they move from the marsh drains and into the bay and proceed to move from the bay to the main parts of the channels and out of the passes. So for example, this year we have not really had any cool fronts or cold fronts yet. It's like 85 degrees still, and the water is still fairly warm. Although it's starting to cool down a little bit, we just haven't hit that turning point where the flounder have started to run. So they're not really in their normal run areas as of now. If you're going out to look for flounder right now, what I would recommend doing is looking closer to the marshes or closer to the backwaters, and you're probably going to have more success in those shallower backwaters than you would in your main run areas. And what you're really looking for to start the run is a strong cold front that is paired with a very strong north wind. And what that north wind is going to do is flush or drain all that water out of the bay, and with that draining water, those flounder are also going to drain out. So that's pretty much all there is to it, y'all. Like I said, this is the last week for keeping flounder before the flounder closure, which runs from November 1st to December 15th, I believe. During that period, you are not allowed to keep any flounder. And it has been a pretty warm year so far, but lucky enough, we actually do have a decent cool front moving through later in the week. On Wednesday, I believe, we're gonna have temperatures down into the upper 50s and a north wind that is supposed to blow around 30 miles an hour. So I expect that is gonna make these fish start to move. And I can promise you guys, I will definitely be out there fishing the second half of this week, hoping to catch a few big ones as that cold front rolls by. So make sure to grab yourself a rod, some bait, and get out there and get after them before that season closes. That's pretty much it for the video, guys. But if you guys learned something new today, make sure to hit that like button, leave a comment down below, let me know your favorite flounder bait, and also don't forget to subscribe if you are not already. And if you are, like always, guys, I thank you so very much. And until next time, peace.